Hello, Care Prevention, and welcome to video 2 in our series about concussion. And this video is over the assessment of concussion. You know, one of the things that struck me the most from your textbook is how it refers to a concussion as a metabolic crisis. And from the video above on our descriptions and definitions of concussion, if you would consider that some of the injury that happens to the brain can cause extensive damage, including bleeding and possibly cell death in the brain, then this will help you to understand going forward through the assessment why some of our athletes feel the way they do and even act the way they do. So what I'd like to do is I'd start with, and this goes back to some of our earlier parts of the class, is to remind you that whenever there's an injury, the first thing that you do as a practitioner is you provide a primary survey as a part of your evaluation. And so when you first come onto the field or onto the court, what you're looking for in that primary survey is airway, breathing, and circulation. And a lot of times you identify that just by the postures that the athlete is exhibiting on their court or on their field. And so if they're rolling around and moving quite a bit, that's a good thing. If they're crying or screaming, that's a good thing because it usually means that the really bad stuff is not occurring. If they're motionless, if they're still, this is where concern should really start to strike you. And no doubt it probably will. But when you see that athlete and they're not moving and they're not reacting to their environment, this gives us a lot of red flags that something very serious may be occurring. Now, with a concussion, there are some special things that we want to give attention to. And so behind me here in our primary survey, after those ABCs right here, what I go to is a very specific thing where you have to rule out cervical spine injury. A motionless and for lack of better words, lifeless athlete is a very dangerous situation. And so what I want to impart on you here is that if you find your athlete is not moving and is fairly motionless, then the first thing you need to assume is that they possibly have lost consciousness. Now, on this side, we have to understand that if they are not moving, they also may have a neck injury. And this is something that we're going to talk about in the next video section down from here about cervical spine injury. But for this specific idea, we want to know that a head injury can also be a neck injury. And we also want to know that if there is a head injury present, we may not be able to identify a cervical spine injury. And by that I mean they may not have the ability or the capacity because of their head injury to be appropriate enough to help you rule out that neck injury being present. And so what you have to do is, in this case, you have to assume that there is a neck injury and you have to activate the emergency medical system. And that is 911 in most cases. And so what we're going to tell you to do is to stabilize the head. And on page 145, there's a great picture, and you're going to see this again, in the videos to follow. But you're going to see this picture of a coach or a practitioner holding the head specifically of a football athlete, and that is the procedure you're going to follow. And once you stabilize the head, you're locked in, and I'll go into that more in the next videos. But you need to understand that that is your position right there, and you are trying to stabilize a potential neck injury. Now, as you work through your primary survey, you may find that they become appropriate and they can rule out a neck injury in the next few moments. But if you can't, if you find an unconscious athlete, immediately you need to activate EMS. That is just because you don't know what could be going on, and so the safe bet is then to err on the side of caution. Now, with that being said, you've done your primary survey, and I'm going to get kind of more into this here in just a moment, but a lot of the time you are asking them very specific questions about their symptoms. When it kind of becomes okay in the moments after that head injury, you're going to begin quizzing them, and probably do this on the field of the court, about if they have a headache. Do you have ringing in your ears? Do you have nausea? Do you have neck pain? Do you have fill in the blank from that timeout graph, or the timeout table 9.1 that talked about all those signs and symptoms? You're going to ask all those questions. And the more information you gather about how that athlete feels at the time of the accident, and the better you are at identifying what time it happened, the more you can help that athlete later in recovery. So we have a couple of things here. First of all, what are their signs and symptoms, again? And then second of all, there's a assessment tool that we use called the SCAT-2, and your book talks a lot about the SCAT-3, and that's a great tool as well, but the SCAT-2 is the one we use at Carl Albert just because we like that one a little more. It gives us a little better workability for our setting. And so the SCAT-2 is a tool that is on paper, and it allows you, the practitioner, to go in and deliver an assessment to the athlete. And SCAT stands for Sport Concussion Assessment Tool. And it covers these 8 criteria right over here next to me. And so what you're going to do is you're going to start with that symptom evaluation. And again, that starts right there on the field. And so you're going to recover several of these symptoms right there on the field, and then you're going to be able to document those in your tool right on that first part. The next part here that we go through is the physical signs. And what we're looking for there is what you can see. A symptom is what an athlete reports to you. A sign is actually what you can see. And so again, you're going to begin recording those and documenting those on your SCAT tool as soon as the injury occurs. Now, another thing that is very important is the Glasgow Coma Scale. And this is a scale that tells us the level of consciousness of the athlete. And so I can catch you up here. There is a SCAT-2 tool linked down below these videos, and you'll see that. But if you look at the Glasgow Coma Scale, you could pair an athlete up pretty quickly to their level of consciousness that they're showing you after the injury occurred. The next thing is, let's say you've went through all those things, you've gotten them to the sideline, you've cleared their neck, and hopefully that happens every time, but you get them over to the sideline, and now you're going to begin a sideline evaluation. The sideline assessment on the SCAT tool is very much specific to the sport that they're playing. So what you're going to do is you're going to ask them questions about the venue that they're at. You're going to ask them questions about the score, about the play. You want to gather up as much data about what they can do for recall and for appropriateness as you can. And so that's all going to fall into your sideline assessment. Next on that list is our cognitive assessment, and this is about memory and recall. One of the primary components on this is that you give them a list of words, and you're going to tell them to repeat that list of words to you at that time, and then you're going to tell them that you're going to ask that list of words later in the assessment, and so that they know that they're going to have to be able to repeat that to you at a later time, and so maybe they'll work a little harder to recover those words at that time. So you deliver the cognitive assessment, and then you're going to ask them to go through a series of balance, and that's single leg stance, double leg stance, having them do some reactions with their eyes closed, and this is just to see if there was a balance component to their injury, which could suggest inner ear or other types of injuries. And I don't want you to ever think that just because they only have a balance issue or like a vertigo type injury that they don't have a concussion. That's simply not true. A concussion can exhibit itself exclusively to one symptom, and from our previous video, what we want to identify is that if they have one symptom out of that table 9.1, then they have a concussion, and you as a professional, have to treat that as such. You can't try to diagnose this and send this off as something else. If they exhibit any of these things, then we need to take a very careful look at this and assume that there is a concussion present. Next on our list is coordination exam. And what this uses is simply the finger to nose touch and back, and doing it with the eyes closed. And this is just seeing if there is a coordination issue there. Now, this is where we begin to look at repeating the cognitive exam. And so we can do that, and this is kind of the point where I would say, kind of with some jest here, but you kind of think of athletes, and then you kind of think of jocks, and then you kind of think of, oh, this guy, he's not really smart anyways. He couldn't have repeated those words to you anyways. And I hear that a lot from coaches, and they do it kind of with a laugh. So the question comes up, well, could they have done it before? And how do you know, especially if you don't know that athlete very well? Maybe you're on the sidelines and you're asked to do that or deliver that SCAT 3 or SCAT 2, and you don't know what that athlete could have done anyways, right? So how do we avoid that? Well, right here under this part of our video or our outline here, we're looking at a word called baseline. And so what we recommend that you do is to accrue a baseline data field on all of your athletes prior to the season even beginning. And so it's going to be very laborious, right? Because you're going to go through all of these things with every athlete prior to the beginning of the season. And so a question always comes up, well, is it worth it? Well, you bet it's worth it, especially in the age that we live in. Especially with what we're getting on concussion now. We need to be able to verify what we do is right. And a return to play decision has to be justified. And if we can't justify it by saying this is close to or better than their baseline score, then we cannot justify a return to play decision. And so I'm going to talk more about that in our next video. But if you could consider the value of a baseline measurement by using this SCAT tool prior to a season starting, then you can understand that using it when a concussion accident occurs, the value is, well, it's just priceless, isn't it? Especially if it becomes your player or your kid that is being evaluated. So, this is our concussion assessment. In our next video, I'm going to address return to play, but I'm also going to address the grading scale. And if you'll notice, I have not even talked about how we talk about how severe a concussion is. And that has to do with the fact that these symptoms occur, and we do not give a grade to it until the symptoms are gone. And so that's a substantial thing, because everything else in athletics or healthcare for that matter can be given severity as it is occurring. Concussion is not that way. Stay tuned. See you in the next video.